Hey guys, Omni here. Welcome back for our reaction to the final breakdown for The Mandalorian Season 3. If you haven't seen my reaction to the finale, go check it out. It is on the channel right now. But let's go ahead and dive into ROCKSTARS' breakdown of that episode and see what all details, if any, we missed. Here we go.
Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Eric Voss, and this is a breakdown of The Mandalorian Season 3, Episode 8, Chapter 24, the season finale. I'm gonna break down all the Star Wars Easter eggs and details you missed in this finale and where everything's headed next in Ahsoka. Subscribe to my new channel, The Deep Dive, where this Friday will be my analysis of Guardians of the Galaxy, and you can support this growing network by grabbing something from our merch store, nerdriot.shop, like our 89P13 Rocket Science tee. Okay, this finale episode opens on Mandalore, where Axe Woves is blasting through storm clouds into the upper atmosphere, just getting hammered with rain, which I like to think accounts for a metaphorical living waters baptism. Because boy oh boy, did Axe Woves really prove us wrong with anybody who thought
Dude,
he
hell
might have
yeah,
been another
man.
spy. No, our man is a hero.
My God, that scene was so intense because you felt like the weight of this when he landed, the urgency, the command that was in his voice, and the worry and the concern for everybody else. He was like, get everybody out. I got this. Worry about everything else later. Just get the hell out of here. I loved it. It was just so, it was a really strong scene. I honestly really thought, he might, go down with the ship when it all was said and done. But I'm glad that he made it out okay, because my God, dude, he came in there storming and leading that charge with a sense of urgency we really hadn't seen. Dude really came up to bat with that one.
Hero. And when he was plunging that light cruiser down on Moff Gideon's base, he was totally aiming for the bushes because there goes my hero. Axe's communication with Bo-Katan points out a recurring issue on Mandalore this season. We thought because of storm formations, but in reality, more likely a signal emitted by Moff Gideon's base to keep his operation secret, which is why he only was able to bypass it with a call to Elia Kane last episode. Bo-Katan orders Axe to use his capital ship as a decoy, which he does, making its red mythosaur paint job a perfect target in retrospect, but really it is Axe's idea to plunge Moff Gideon's former light cruiser back into the base.
That's something I didn't even consider. Like, while I was watching it, Gideon literally is, like, bombarded by his own ship. It's his ship that they stole and crashed into his base and him himself,
making a perfect circle to bring an end to Moff Gideon's insanity. And I like to think of this as Axe Woves' hold-o maneuver. An axe, and my axe. Bo-Katan and Cascarees escape the Beskar commandos by detonating a charge, but Bo does a pretty cool move of thrusting forward while pivoting midair to get off a few final shots against the commandos. By the way, this white Beskar armor looks similar to the non-Beskar armor worn by the First Order stormtroopers, so maybe Brendol Hux will rip off Moff Gideon's designs, but use a cheaper material.
It's also Imperial Super Commandos, like, just upgraded. Like, we've seen that, like, stylization before in Rebels. It's just got some updates to it, obviously with some tweaks and some improvements over time, but it's the same gear for the most part.
Din Djarin breaks free from custody, and I love how they mix in Ludwig Göransson's flute every time he activates with a cool move. In general, I just love the sound mixing of the scene. Every punch and block clangs with the sound of Beskar against Beskar. Din Djarin snatches a Beskar blade from the commando's boot, and knowing that it's made of Beskar, uses it to block a blaster bolt from the other one. Grogu riding in
Did he block it? It looked like it hit his shoulder, but maybe that's just where the spark pad was.
G12 saves him. No. Of course,
hell yeah, man.
Back there, and I just love that Grogu is using a free hand to smash that no button over and over to scream at the commando. Grogu uses Bacta spray, the same healing fluid that's in the Bacta tanks. This was sprayed by IG-11 on Din Djarin in the season 1 finale, that was chapter 8, and brought back again to heal Mando in chapter 5 in the Book of Boba Fett. This finale is titled The Return, and in addition to being the return for the Mandalorian people to their home planet, finally rid of the curse of Moff Gideon, and the return of life to the planet after centuries of civil war, it's also a return to form for the series as a whole. Back to those pre-Darksaber days of a lone wolf and cub partaking on episodic adventures. Many of us last week definitely overthought chapter 23's episode title, The Spies, to mean there might have been another traitorous Mandalorian working with Moff Gideon and Elia Kane, someone like the Armorer or Axe Woves, but no. And honestly, it's a relief to see these Mandalorians working together and not having to justify a bizarre twist that would have contradicted their actions up until now. But one interpretation that I really liked, a theme undercurrent discussed by my buddy Ryan Airy over at Screen Crush and many others online, is that
Finally.
The spies of the title parallel the 12 spies Moses sent out to scout the land of Canaan to find a new home for the Israelites in the Old Testament. At the start of the season, when we translated that Book of Exodus Easter egg on the tablet that was found on Mandalore, I speculated that Din Djarin, Grogu, and Bo-Katan reflect figures like Moses, who led the Israelites out of Egypt.
Because again, like I said, and he might even go on to explain this, it was Bo-Katan's mission. Like, she's the one that declared this and requested members from every tribe, much like Moses did in the story. Like, that whole episode is a 1-for-1 of that section of the Bible, that entire tale of the 12 spies. And that is what they are called, the 12 spies. The 12 members of each individual tribe that volunteered, or at least in the text was selected. I don't know if they volunteered or were selected, but went forth. But in the show, Bo-Katan, much like Moses, recruits spies, scouts from each of the tribes from both sides to go. And how many went? How many volunteered? 12. There were 12 volunteers within the episode that joined on this expedition down. And also I've heard some people like, but that's scouting, not spying. I was like, the origin of the word spy is to look, to search, to gaze, to, in essence, scout, what now is known as the word scouting. But classically, spying, it has nothing to do with espionage or secrecy. That is a modernization, a contemporary evolution of that term that has kind of taken root. A synonym of spying is scout. They are synonyms of one another. And that's where we were kind of caught off guard. And I think that was also intentional, to build tension within the scene, within the episode, to cast doubt, to create this sense of mistrust, because that's also been a theme of the show all the way through. They want us to kind of be on edge and to doubt, because they've always had us pitted against one another from the very beginning. From our views of Din Djarin, once we realized he was part of this religious cult, as it were, and then season 2 continues to back that, and then season 3 starts to show the flip side of that. The show from season 1 till now has always been trying to keep us guessing whether or not we're actually supposed to be rooting for them in the long run. And at the end of the day, it's just this compromise, this union of ideals, and this return to their promised land, to their home. And that's, again, another parallel of that story. The bulk of the people remain in safety while this group of 12 volunteers go ahead to make sure it's safe for the rest to come down. And that is the story of the episode. But we had that initial framing with Elia Kane at the beginning of the episode to really kind of play into the contemporary ideal of it. And it was a red herring. That's all it was. I mean, there was also very pointed shots used for the armor specifically. I think they've always wanted us to wonder where she's going to land until the final moment when she comes in clutch at the end to just show that our prejudices built in is what helped betray us in the end. We betrayed ourselves by going along with that title at face value without reading into it any kind of further. And again, I've talked about this before. The Mandalorian people are based heavily and rooted heavily in Western theology in a lot of ways. The Hebrews and the Jews and the Exodus and their exile, their not even exile, their expulsion and their quest to return to that land has always been a theme and a through line of the Mandalorians, both in Legends and in the current canon. So, I don't know. And I'm kicking myself because I didn't realize that in the episode myself and fell into the same trap as everybody else until this whole side of it was illuminated for me. Now, I have still seen people say that, even with this out in the wild now and kind of catching fire a little bit, there's still people hanging on to the idea that is a contemporary meaning of the term. And if you do go that route, there's so much mental gymnastics you have to go through, because the only spy on screen we see in the entire episode is Kane. I've seen some people say, well, the probe droid is the other spy, or the council is our spies. And They're not, though. They're just a cabal. They aren't actively doing any spying themselves. They may have their own spies or their own agents, but we never see them, and they're never really referenced outside of maybe Hux's little call of his mystery figures who gave him the information that Gideon's been running this side project of his on Navarro. But that's, again, a very stretched out leap. These episode titles are almost always, and not even almost, they are always just straightforward at the end of the day. They are in your face in the episode. And also the episode titles are always the theme, the overall theme and stories that the episode centers around. And that spy element, if we're considering Kane as part of the title, that's literally just the opening, not even like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever. Like that's all it is. That has no bearing on the rest of the episode thematically. Like that's all the relevance that scene really has, is within that opening setup for the episode, and then from there it's gone. And it's just in line with the other titles that have centered around the Mandalorians themselves, like the Apostate, the Foundling, the Convert. And, you know, if you look at this as a two-parter, since both these episodes were just the same connected story, both directed by Rick Famuyiwa, you know, these two can be viewed simultaneously as one story. So who are we following? Who is this about? What is this about? It's the reclamation of Mandalore. So the titles, to me, would logically be about the people we're following. Our spies on the ground trying to return to Mandalore, the spies, the return. You know, they're the ones that are sent ahead. They are the ones that report back what they find, and they go to battle, man. I've also seen some people say, well, they set that up and would fulfill that later was their expectation. We've also never seen that before. The episode titles are specific to that episode. You're not going to have a title paid off in another episode with a completely different title related to the story of that episode. The episode titles are relevant only to the one we are currently watching. So there's just a couple of fallacies that did come up with that. But again, like initially I was right there with everybody else thinking, like, who's the other spy? You know, it wasn't until that comment came and just opened up my eyes to the whole thing, because it wasn't something that even crossed my mind at the time. Like, I did entertain the idea that technically, and while they were called a scouting party in the episode, I was like, they are going down to spy the land, to spy ahead, to look for any dangers to make sure it's safe. I mean, that is what spies do in a way. Collect information, go out and observe. That is the essence of it. That's why these terms are so interchangeable. It's just we don't think of them that way anymore. So it was just right there in our faces. In that vein, I've seen people say that, well, R5 is the other spy, clearly. You know, and I'm just like, R5 wasn't even, I don't even think came up in that episode at all. And again, that goes back to the point that those things are always obvious and self-contained in the episode the title is meant to represent. So R5 was, if we saw him, was only ever in a background shot in Din's ship or just scuttling around. Like, he wasn't really there, and he's not even a spy. Because we only ever see him again in this episode, or at least prominently featured in this. This is really the only answer, because it's just too in theme with the entire season. It's in theme with the quest at hand. It's in theme with it is like a straight up adaptation of that parable, of that tale. So like, there is no, you can debate all day, but there is no other answer at this point. Like, that's just what it is. I mean, it's too obvious at this point. Then again, I guess you could also consider, like, if you encompass both meanings into the title, you could combine Kane with the Mandalorians as well for your totality in the title. But I think the intent, at least, remains with the Mandalorians themselves at the end of the day. Hey guys, Future Omni here real quick. I was listening back through the edit, and I just wanted to be clear that I'm not like harping on anybody who was confused when episode 7 ended and we were like, well, who's the other spy or anything like that. It's more or less to the people who have now learned what the intention was and what the reference of the title was and are still kind of resistant to the revelation. Because I, like you all and most people, was also at the end of the episode, you can see my reaction. I was confused, and it wasn't until after the fact that I was like, oh, that's what it meant. So like, I'm not like trying to be like all from high and mighty and all that. Like, how dare you not understand it? It's more that like, the more this is kind of, the understanding is kind of put back out there after the episode, that we're still seeing people push back. Because at the end of the day, at the end of the episode, it didn't make any sense. And outside of this explanation, it still really doesn't make any sense. Again, you can stretch your argument to try to make it fit, like slam that square block into that circle hole and try to make it work. But this is, again, like I say, go on to say in this, that it's really kind of the only explanation that fits. And I do think that that does kind of fall on them for the creative choice, because they had to have known that this was going to set up a false expectation going into the finale. You know, while we all could theorize, we could all spit things, and when it doesn't pan out, and there was setup for that, at the end of the day, that can mostly fall on the creatives for that happening. Again, it may be intentional. I don't know if it worked out in the way that they had hoped, because clearly some of those scenes were shot to cast doubt. So I think they knew about the kind of obfuscation of the meaning behind the title, but is that fair to us? That's something that's definitely up for debate, but I think now that we kind of know what is going on here, thanks to some people who have a little more knowledge about the roots that they're drawing from, I think we can finally start to see what they were going for.
Or Joshua, Moses' successor, who led them to the Promised Land. Those 40 years wandering the desert were incredibly important because they better inform us as we suffer and stumble through our lives. And it was God's will that Moses' generation die before Joshua could enter the Promised Land, so that the sins of the past generation would be fully wiped away. Moses was an important leader, of course, but he had to pay that price and allow his descendants to inherit his dreams, as all parents and elders must do. Now, one visual contrast I love this episode is how Bo-Katan's Mandalorian scouts escaped the caves by thrusting upward, followed immediately by a cut of Moff Gideon's TIE interceptors hanging like bats, dropping downward.
That's a nice visual detail. I like that.
This episode around an amazing aerial battle that's just undeniably fun to watch.
Yes.
Moff Gideon tracks Din and Grogu through a map of his base. On the left, Aurebesh translates to East Wing. In the upper middle, that's serve, then room, server room. And then to the right, in smaller text, that's communication something. That's probably where he's sending out this signal jammer from. Din Djarin radios to R5 to scomp into the base, referring to the scomp linking that he does later, just like R2-D2 does on the Death Star in A New Hope. I love R5's worried sigh. And Mando responds,
"Sorry, I don't speak binary."
Yes, binary is the Indian-verse term for droid speak that we hear spoken by Astromechs, but I guess Mando understands everything R5 says after this just via context. As Grogu follows Mando, notice he spins the IG-12 droid.
Well, it's more so because he understands based on the results. Because he gives commands, he gets results. Until later when R5 is distracted and he's like, R5, gate.
Head around 360 degrees, using that IG droid capability to see behind his back and in all directions. R5 uses jet thrusters, like the ones R2-D2 first showed off in Attack of the Clones, and I like how he first wheels up to the edge as if the poor guy might want to give himself a chopper push, but it's just...
I honestly for like a quick second thought he was just going to yeet himself off of the ledge. Not even no joke.
To nervously look over the edge because he cannot help it from being...
Why do they build these things with no rails? Honestly, like, for real. Why does the Empire hate railing?
The same red astromech with the busted motivator who led to R2-D2 going to Luke and Uncle Owen. I just love how important a path R5 has.
I love it. Yes.
So smoothly lands on that light.
Yeah, dude, and just like
break his sprint,
he's on a mission.
And thank God, because when they land on those gauntlets and those gauntlets drop below the cloud layer, the camera stays on the clouds, and it's literal seconds before the TIE interceptors and bombers rise up through it. Director Rick Famuyiwa and editors Jeff Siebenek and Rachel Goodlett-Katz do an amazing job intercutting rapidly throughout this episode to elevate the tension, so that in moments like this, when we stay on the cloud layer for a full 17 seconds, we understand how critical all of that timing was.
Yes. because it's a thing. It was a strategic point because their systems will not work once they enter the cloud barrier. So one, as long as all they see when they go up there is that cruiser, that's going to be their focus. That's what they believe the fleet will be, because they can't detect with the radar systems or visually the rest of the fleet, where the actual Mandalorian people have escaped to, because they're obscured visually by the cloud layer and electronically because the systems that the interceptors would be using to scan are disrupted and non-functional while in the clouds. It's the perfect cover to get away so that Axe's plan works. Like, the timing of that is crucial, and I love that element of it.
Except the light cruiser's cannons to operate them from the captain's chair, basically doing all 6 parts.
Because honestly, I did see a few people be like, how did they not see them? They would have went right past them. I was like, have we been watching the same show? God.
The smugglers run on your own? Good luck with that. But if you look closely, he shoots one TIE interceptor's wing askew, and we follow that interceptor from above as it skids along the light cruiser's hull until its wing rips off and it rolls and crashes right before the bridge. A crash shown from a mounted camera point of view of the interceptor in front of it. We're just seeing some great dogfight cinematography here. But my favorite sequence of the episode is Din Djarin.
Yeah, man. He gets his own hallway scene.
Like the ones that Darth Maul and Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan fought through on Naboo and Phantom Menace. But here there are 4 levels, and it's structured kind of like a video game or a literal gauntlet challenge, with each level getting increasingly difficult. Stage 1.
That's very true.
Surprised to steal one of their blades, and he stabs through the gaps of their armor. Then he uses the shield in the back of the first commando to block the blaster shot, and then he flings the blade into the neck. But that guy drops down into hell.
Yeah, because like that's not actually what he's reaching for. He was trying to get his gun, but he's like, nope, shoot. He lost the knife and the gun.
At this point, all the commandos see Mando coming, so he's lost the element of surprise, and these next commandos have their prods ready. But as with the knife, Mando uses the weapons he steals from each stage to help him through the next one. So stage 2, Mando ping-pongs between them, but like a wrestler using elastic ropes to gain momentum, he uses that momentum to spring forward and knee the first one in the head.
God, it's so well done, man.
Mando stole the prod, so now they have their shields up. Mando's able to prod one of them in the foot to knock him down, and then he snatches that one's blaster. Now during all this, R5 is spotted by a mouse droid who sounds a siren. It actually sounds like R5 says, "Ay, ay, ay." But in that delayed time, as on stage 3, the blaster fire is producing so much smoke that it creates a literal smoke screen. And when that 4th shield opens, stage 4, Mando has regained the element of surprise, and he slides past them to grab the blaster, and he uses these 2 commandos' shock that one man could bring down a full hallway of them to confirm their greatest fears. So with all these stages cleared, notice how Mando has red light from above, looking just like that red light that is reflected on his chrome dome in the opening Lucasfilm fanfare of every episode this season. And then R5, now swarmed by mouse droids, jets away, knocking one of them off the ledge as he departs. So they enter this tank room that we saw last episode, and we learn that the shadowy figures that Moff Gideon passed are not Snoke Strandcasts, but rather clones of Moff Gideon himself, which is why last episode he said,
and the most impressive improvement is that it has me in it.
This proves that all of Moff Gideon's side cloning research with Dr. Pershing, notes that he did not share with Brendol Hux with full transparency, was really Moff Gideon's attempt to subvert Hux's side of the business, Project Necromancer, which of course is to clone Palpatine, so that Moff Gideon could create these Force-sensitive clones of himself. So this may dispel the thinking that Grogu's DNA will directly lead to Snoke.
Well, they did say that he was... The research was shared in an essence, but he had his own secret side project that he was using that data for. So I do think some of Grogu's experimentation was still involved and still passed along, but he had his own plans for that, is how I understood it. That could be, wrong. They could be doing it their own way without Grogu, but that was my understanding, that it was all connected, but Gideon was doing some extra stuff on the side for himself and his own egotistical power trip.
The Palpatine clones of the sequel trilogy. Then again, last week Gideon told Hux that Pershing's cloning research was lost for now. So I assume that Eli Kane may now report to Hux, and that knowledge will continue to serve the First Order, even if Grogu's DNA is no longer in the mix. But important to note, when we saw Moff Gideon in Season 1 and Season 2, he had a mustache, whereas this season he's been clean shaven along with all of his clones. So who knows? The Moff Gideon who dies this episode might not even be the original Gideon.
I've said that. I brought that up.
They'll always return. Mandalorian survivors, played by Charles Parnell, that's Warlock from Top Gun Maverick, and Charles Baker, that's Skinny Pete from Breaking Bad, take them to this refuge cave filled.
Man, I'm still butthurt that I didn't recognize him immediately. I watch Breaking Bad at least once a year. God damn it.
With regrown plant life.
These are the old species indigenous to Mandalore. They've been dormant since before the centuries of civil war.
He's referring to the long history of Mandalorian civil wars that took place on the planet before the Clone Wars, one of the most recent ones referenced in Chapter 14 by Boba Fett.
My father was a foundling. He even fought in the Mandalorian civil wars.
External and internal strife reduced Mandalore to the barren desert as part of the Mandalorian cataclysm, leading to their dome cities like Sundari. So this is a version of Mandalore that even Bo-Katan would be unfamiliar with. The survivor captain says,
Once the planet was abandoned, they sprouted in spots. We cultivated farms. Life persists.
So I think this is the 40 years in the desert of the Exodus parallel in episode 1. Mandalorians as a people are warriors by nature. They did this to their own planet. And so to heal it, they all have to leave this promised land and serve a generation in exile before they're allowed to return to the promised land renewed. Also, this line, life persists, seems like a Star Wars version of
life. Yeah.
Finds a way.
The armorer
I think I said that exact thing.
The armorer's tongs are at her side, though she didn't seem to have them when she jumped out of the gauntlet, but whatever. And Bo-Katan ignites the Darksaber to lead the charge. The Mandos and Commandos.
Maybe she's got a bag of holding.
Collide, and we stay with one commando who looks around completely confused until the armor slams into him with their hammer and tongs. It's so great, and it's followed by a shot of Bo-Katan and the armor side by side. Bo-Katan slashing down with the Darksaber while
and
the armor backs someone down with their tools. It's like we're seeing the power of the Darksaber align with the tools of the Mandalorians, so that the tools of the Mandalorians are all that will matter from here forward. But either way, they're both together.
I talked about this in my breakdown. My discussion about this episode is like they look like just a swarm of insects just beaming at one another, or like, you know, we saw with the interceptors, you could even equate it to bats or a flock of birds just kind of clashing together. But to me, like, it always echoed, especially when it was buried once the base is under the surface, like just shaking up a hornet's nest or a yellow jacket nest, because it kind of evoked that kind of idea, because it's just these swarming like bodies in mass just clashing against each other in like a bit of noise. I love the idea of it visually.
Using the weight of Mandalore's gravity with their descent to empower these attacks. Gideon rages at Mando for smothering his clone babies that he didn't really try that hard in fact, to fight. I actually wouldn't be surprised if the stunt actors who together play Din Djarin, Lateef Crowder, and Brendan Wayne were the ones in the suits for these scenes, because they're the same height. It'd just be perfect to end the season letting these two go at it like this. Gideon unleashes his Praetorian guards. Grogu marches in with the angriest face I've ever seen.
No.
So Grogu has to briefly handle them by himself, but he giggles as he force leaps along the light rigging. And notice how throughout this episode, Grogu never uses the Force as a weapon. He only uses it to block, to defend, to swipe weapons away. This would be a trait taught to him by Luke.
Oh, and to push, but to your point, same idea.
Skywalker, and a trait taught to Luke Skywalker by Master Yoda, but only after the Jedi Order had fallen. Because in Revenge of the Sith, Yoda was killing plenty of clone troopers. Bo-Katan tackles Gideon.
Yeah, he really was there as like a support character, as like a CC on your team. You know, Din and Bo, they were your DPS or your tank, and he's there for the backup, you know. Disarm, interrupt, get back, stun. You know, he was like locking people in place. He was your Morgana or Lux. If you play League at all, you might know what I'm talking about.
Gideon to save Din Djarin and to free him up to help Grogu. Now these two face off, and as Gideon ignites his staff, Bo-Katan ignites a Darksaber and angles it toward him. And I love anytime you can see the flatness and the broken nature of the blade. I'm reminded the Darksaber is an anomaly among the other lightsabers, which are more cylindrical and pole-like. This is a flat blade, and it's a cracked aberration that is not meant to be long for this universe. As the Praetorian guards close in on Grogu, we see his little head and pointed ears in the foreground, mirroring our very first shot of the child in the pilot episode of the series when Mando first saw him in that basket bassinet. This is when he's at his most vulnerable. But with Din Djarin's offensive strikes and Grogu's defensive blocks, they're able to defeat these 3 Praetorian guards. Between this and The Last Jedi, it's clear that you really just need a powerful duo whenever you run into these guys. Meanwhile, Gideon crushes the Darksaber. Similar to Rey and Kylo splitting the lightsaber in The Last Jedi, ripping it in half because they both wanted it equally, here both Gideon and Bo-Katan are squeezing that Darksaber handle so hard out of a similar unyielding desire. Now yeah, it does feel a bit wrong that a supercharged grip could break an ancestral weapon, but it's also a cursed relic that has only brought pain to this world. Bo-Katan doesn't need it to lead. To me, its broken appearance has always given it some fragility, and it's always looked more like a ghastly corpse on his last leg. So
I mean, thematically, it needs to be gone. I've seen some people say they're upset about it because it's got this long history and all this stuff, but that history, outside of Tar Vizsla and his inception of it, he was like the only person who could grasp the idea of what it meant. It was the Mandalorian people who didn't have those ideals that turned it into what it is, and those Mandalorians for decades used it as a symbol to unite, but it never did, because one clan would want it over the other. Somebody else would want to wield it. So all it did was create this envy to the point where the Jedi tried to take it out of the equation, returning it back, but they ended up breaking it back out anyway, and the cycle began all over again. And it's this attachment to this thing and some of these traditions that is just unhealthy. Like, there's no feasible way while this saber exists for someone not to long for it. I feel like it's just nature is destined to divide. Like, as much as they want it to be, the story is that it would unify. The reality has always been it breaks them apart. And I think with the theme of the show, with this compromise, with these bridging of ideals where we've seen like the armorer loosen up on what is and is not Mandalorian in her eyes. Same with Din, how they've come to evolve and learn. Same with Bo. They've become to kind of see each other's points of view without compromising one or the other, but knowing that these things are all Mandalorian by nature, and that doesn't divide them. That they can live side by side, and they can unify side by side with or without this blade. Gideon even knew that problem with it because he tried to pit Bo against Din. Like, I said this before, I don't know that he lost on purpose to Din, but it brought him joy and satisfaction knowing that Din winning it would pit him against Bo, but he didn't bank or bet on the type of person that Din was, or that the Force would kind of play things out the way it does, and that would backfire. I love that thematically for this show, man.
I don't mind seeing it go. Axe Woves crashes into the base.
Anyway, sorry.
River formed by Moff Gideon's fusion bombs during that Night of Thousand Tears, making this, plus this being Gideon's own ship, poetic justice for how Moff Gideon dies. It's like poetry, it rhymes. Also, yeah, being caught in a fiery explosion is exactly how Esposito's character gets in Breaking Bad. Grogu saves them
That's
from
a
the
good
fire
point.
with a force bubble. As music plays, a dramatic swell of Grogu's reunion music that we heard when he and Din Djarin reunited on Tatooine in the Book of Boba Fett. Actually, speaking of Exodus earlier, this melody sounds very similar to Stephen Schwartz's Power of God music in the
Yes,
Prince of
it
Egypt.
does. Oh God, that movie's so good.
Parting the Red Sea is miraculously manipulating nature in a similar way with fire, saving them in a similar move to Cain and Jairus' sacrifice saving rebels. So we circle back to the opening scene of the season, the Mandalorian baptism ritual for Ragnar Vizsla. It was interrupted before, now completed in the living waters. Thank God the ferocious beast at the bottom of these waters didn't come up to interrupt it here.
Someone also pointed out, and I haven't gone back to fact check this, but I've seen a few people mention that this time, the verbiage this time when he was taking the creed didn't include the "I will never remove my helmet" line. I like it. Evolution.
All the Mandalorian houses are represented by their banners. On the far left, the branch with the red plumage of House Vizsla, and on the far right, the animal face in white on a red banner of House Eldar. There's also a ring-shaped sigil on a yellow banner towards the left side that kind of looks like the Crusader sigil. Whereas before, this chamber was shrouded in darkness that no one could see on Disney Plus. Now it's lit with lanterns, gone from ruins to a proper temple. Despite customarily going helmets off everywhere, Bo-Katan and the Night Owls watch his ceremony respectfully with their helmets on. Ragnar completes baptism and Din Djarin presents Grogu to be added to the song, but since Grogu cannot speak, Din Djarin adopts Grogu as his son so that he can be his Mandalorian apprentice named Din Grogu. Grogu looks down into the water, but whereas before it was dark and murky, now it is illuminated and clear as the clouds have lifted over Mandalore and its depths are no longer threatening, but a source of inspiration. Grogu connects with the Mythosaur, setting up a possible future where these two can meet. The smallest Mandalorian and the biggest one.
Yep.
Forge, using a torch handed to her by the armorer, a torch that, it might just be me, but it looks like it might have been made from the handle of the broken Darksaber, which would be perfect, because formerly a weapon brandished to declare rule over Mandalorians, now a beacon of light to spark their eternal flame of a new generation. And overall, this forge looks like it has 4 big columns, cylindrical, almost like giant lightsabers with kyber crystals burning from the middle, but here an instrument of growth instead of an instrument of division and death. Din Djarin and Grogu return to the New Republic pilot bar, where once again, it's filled with these...
I do want to say that I'm still really surprised with everything that they've been talking about with leadership, with the flora and fauna returning to life here, that Bo-Katan in all of this has not once, and maybe it's never really needed to come up, but I'm kind of surprised she's never mentioned her sister and her, what her rule was like, because her visage was to echo the flora, the native flora of Mandalore, and her attempts at peace and pacifism was her hope that Mandalore could heal if the fighting stopped. But as we know, Death Watch wouldn't allow that to happen, and things kind of turned out the way they did. But I'm still kind of surprised that, you know, in all of her appearances, both in season 2 and here, we've never once heard of Satine. Likely, also, similarly, that the Clan Ren never comes up. I wonder why that is. There might be a story reason why, and maybe we'll learn that once Sabine turns up. Something may not be around right now, is kind of what I'm thinking.
Easter eggs, that billiards type game that was in the Tashi station in the A New Hope deleted scene, the same location as the Book of Boba Fett. There's various trophies of helmets of stormtroopers, scout troopers, Imperial pilots, RA-7 protocol droid heads, a head of an Imperial probe droid, and now in the far corner, an IG assassin droid head. Misty Roses plays the bartender. She played Kuiil in season 1, and Dave Filoni himself with his hat returns as the X-Wing pilot Trapper Wolf. And I'm pretty sure Dave is saying random Star Wars stuff in the background that they...
Also, that is not Dave's actual hat. That's a hat made specifically for this character, and they won't let him have it based on something something he said in an interview. But yeah, it exists because apparently that the fact that he has a hat that looks similar to the types that he wears in real life has become a point of contention among some people. Apparently. Like, what the fuck?
Kept in because as Grogu sits on the stool, you can definitely hear him say Plo Koon. Jedi Master Plo Koon is obviously
he
super
did.
important to Filoni. He's the one who trained Ahsoka Tano at a young age. He was a great pilot.
He's also his
Plo
favorite
Koon was a cover
Jedi.
story for Luke Skywalker's cameo in the season 2 finale, and a Plo Koon mask showed up as an Easter egg in Andor. Mando tells Carson Teva that he's up to work contract gigs to help him patrol the Outer Rim, setting up the episodic adventures that they'll go on in season 4, and he asks as payment the IG droid head, because since they stopped manufacturing this would be one source of the chip that they need to repair IG-11, which is what Mando does when he returns to Navarro, gets some help from those Anzellans, and resurrects IG-11 as Marshal of Navarro. That was a job Grief Karga asked Mando to do at the start of the season, and IG-11 has red plating matching Grief's robes and the plating of Axwove's redesign of the ship. The episode ends on Din Djarin's new homestead, a tree and a pond in the front yard, as Grogu levitates a frog, as he did with Luke Skywalker in the Book of Boba Fett Chapter 6. He does not eat the frog though, he just plays with it. Our final shot is a Lucasfilmy Iris Out edit, bringing this father and son together in a little bubble. If the Mandalorian wants to move on from these characters as focal ones and instead bring them in every once in a while, this would be a fitting final shot for them. But I think it's important that we see a tree here, because trees are super important, not just to the Jedi religion, but to all religions. When I say Jedi, I'm not talking about the way their creed got bastardized and politicized over the years, but the more natural approach that ultimately has more in common, really, with the Mandalorian creed. There's a Force tree that was in the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. We should also recognize that there was a sacred Gaffi tree to the religion of the Tuskens in the Book of Boba Fett. All these religions, I think, are different interpretations of the same thing. And just as Mandalore has been restored with miraculous plant life, life, interestingly, has also found a way on these lava flats.
I think this is the end. I'll let it play out.
Of the Mandalorian. You can subscribe to Deep Dive NR for deeper analysis.
That was a really solid breakdown, man. I liked all that. It also triggered a lot of great little discussion pieces. Some things that have been floating around in my head just throughout the whole watch and stuff like that. So like I love this whole vibe too. So one thing I was thinking, you know, up until this point, you know, because, you know, like a lot of us was like, wow, it feels like we're bringing all this to close and just kind of doing a full reset, or that we really bookended everything here. And I chose that word for a reason. So we know that the Book of Boba Fett was its own little excerpt, its own little book, if you will. The Mandalorian, seasons 1 through 3, has all had sequential chapters. Like, the chapter count doesn't reset at the end of each season. We were on chapter 24 at the end of this one. And I'm thinking that this is the end of the first book of The Mandalorian. Now, that could change when season 4 does come out. Jon Favreau has already said publicly that he has already written season 4 and that he has no plans or endpoint in mind for this show. Because I know a lot of people are saying that a lot of things are being reported that the Mandalorian film, that Dave Filoni film, is going to close out all of the Dave Filoni projects. But that's not actually what has been said. It's going to close out some of the threads, yes. But from what Favreau says, and he's the actual showrunner for this show, is that, you know, this could go on forever, for as long as people tune in for it. And so I'm very curious to see what that looks like. And it definitely sets the stage. But my question, and the thing that I'm going to keep an eye out for, is if and when season 4 comes out. Now, I imagine we'll probably take a break and focus on some of the other shows and all that. But I imagine that maybe, possibly, when season 4 does come out, if episode 1 will be a chapter 1, or will it be chapter 25? That's what I'm going to keep my eye out for, because I would love to see the beginning of their next adventure, of their next arc, if you will, and see what that looks like. But that's my thoughts. That was the last thing I kind of wanted to get off my chest for today. But I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to you guys. Sound off in the comments. Let me know your thoughts down below. We'll carry on the conversation after the video. Let me know if you caught any Easter eggs or little hidden details or any kind of thematic and visual cinematic connections that didn't get mentioned in this breakdown. I would love to hear them. And guys, if you haven't seen my reaction, go check it out. But, you know, at the end of the day, we got more Star Wars coming. So I hope you enjoyed this reaction, that you stick around, you like the video, leave a comment, subscribe if you're not already, and we'll be back for Visions in 2 weeks? We'll be back for more Star Wars stuff. So I'll be diving right into that. But, you know, for now, all I want to do is shout out our channel legends: Manny Sherritt, Ryan Karen, Jason Coleman, Philly Vane, Yori Corey Scott, Margaret Grace, Melito, Robert Anguiano, Raven McCann, Jeffrey Hale, M. Sephiroth, Jake Cantrell, Josh Lee, and Tiff. Thank you guys so much for your continued support, and everybody who's just been following along for this journey and been along for the ride, and everybody who's been new to the channel here in the last couple of weeks. Welcome, and I'll see you guys in the next video. May the Force be with you always. Take care, everybody.